Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about old books, old art by old guys. And
hold on, unnecessary.
We're here to tell you about old things that you should know, help you understand some old books, help you understand some old ideas, and do it in a way that doesn't suck. That's our whole goal here at Classical Stuff. There are three of us. My name is AJ Hannenberg, and I'm here with Graham Donaldson.
Hi.
And Thomas Magbee.
Hello.
And all three of us work at a classical school in Austin, Texas, and we all really like classical things. If you'd like to support us, you can find us on the Twitters at CLSSCAL stuff. You can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net, which is the same place you can find our website, classicalstuff.net. And we are on Patreon if you ever get the hankering to support us. The $5 level gets you all of our episodes without ads, which you can get right now for free just about anywhere. But if we ever do ads, you can still get them for free.
Great.
And so that's important. All of our stuff for free. At the eventually we're going to redo those first episodes, and they'll go into the Classical Stuff vault, and you'll have to pay to get them. But at the $10 level, you get our banter between episodes and I believe access to our AMA, our monthly AMA that we do. And then at the $15 level, you can help guide the direction of the podcast. You can suggest episodes. You can, send in designs for merch and that sort of thing. You can help us figure out where this is headed next. All right. That is what we're doing. And
it is. We are in the glory days of Austin, Texas weather right now.
It's beautiful.
It is.
Wonderful. It is so gorgeous outside.
It is that perfect October where it's like 75 degrees, 80 degrees outside, and oh my word.
At night, it's sweatshirt and sandals weather. It's great.
Glorious.
Okay, and today's episode is coming from Thomas.
Hi, that's me. So this episode, so it's funny. I'm sure we've talked about this before. We record 3 of these episodes at a time. Sorry if that's like too much.
That is funny.
It's hilarious. What? And so I guess if you ever notice us flagging in like a certain episode, it's probably the 3rd episode of our recording. But so what I'll be talking about today is a continuation of last week's episode. So for you listened to it on Tuesday when it dropped, right? You listened to it immediately. But for us, it was like 3 weeks ago.
Don't you're breaking the...
I've broken this like so many times, so I apologize.
This is the fourth wall, man.
But we talk to our listeners all the time. Hi, YouTube. You can find us on YouTube at Classical Stuff. Okay. So this will be a continuation of what was talked about at the end of last week's episode. So, Graham, that was your episode.
That was my episode.
Or 3 weeks ago. Do you remember this? Okay. Do you remember where we ended? It's roughly the last 7 minutes. I'm sure you have it. A minute-by-minute memory of this thing.
It was,
right?
Does your dog want your stuff?
Yes, and so we talked about dogs mating for life. We talked about the beauty of animals, and what did we talk about in the last 7 minutes?
So I sort of floated out this idea that in the medieval world, rightly thinking about things was also considered medicinal. So that theology was that when someone was a doctor of physics, or when someone was a doctor, there was the medical side of things. So if you go, Doc, my arm hurts, and he'll be like, well, have you tried bleeding? Or whatever they would say in the Middle Ages. Or have you tried these herbs and these sorts of things? But you would also go to a doctor and you would say, Doctor, I can't sleep. I'm just worried about death all the time. And the actual sort of prescription would be to rightly consider things, or to go back and read a catechism and learn about like what you should believe about, death, or whatever the specific thing is on your mind. Go back and rightly consider that thing. And in the medieval structure, the world was set up in a way that God created it, and it had a celestial hierarchy, and you fit into that hierarchy. And insofar as you were trying to get out of that hierarchy, or trying to sort of break out of that hierarchy, you were eventually going to end up sad in some way. Sad, miserable, melancholy was the old word, something like that.
Yes.
And insofar as you sort of submitted to your lot in life and your hierarchy, you were going to actually have some kind of spiritual comfort in that. So it's this idea that rightly considering things and theology was also a form of medicine. And that sort of posited the idea that modern psychology kind of has, talk therapy and self-help books and all these kinds of things are filling that same slot in our sort of human society, our modern society, but without the I guess, the catechism part or without the theology part of it? Or is that a good enough summary? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
So yeah, I mean, I feel great about it.
That was, like you said, last week. So
you mean 3 weeks ago, definitely. Okay, so you place this in medieval time period. We're going to actually even go back further than that. This is an even older idea than even you're pointing to.
Oh my word!
Just you're onto something here. So the
apparently not.
You're onto something, but it just goes back like 1,000 more years. Gotcha. So don't worry about it. So the book.
Just to interrupt, and then I think something
that's
else.
Most of these episodes.
We can also go back and look at AJ's episodes on the 7 deadly thoughts.
Yes,
and the virtues, because that's therein. Or was it AJ's episode or your episode on the 7 deadly thoughts? I think it was AJ's.
AJ did one on hell, which talked about the 7 deadly sins.
Mm-hmm.
I did Evagrius.
Yeah. But in those episodes, when we started talking about the sins...
I think I did one called the 8 Tempting Thoughts.
8 Tempting Thoughts.
Yeah.
So when we did that episode, we were also kind of talking about that thing wherein if you had this sort of thought that you were obsessed with, it could not only affect you spiritually, but it could actually manifest itself physically.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll eventually get there of actually going through like a history of thought. Again, that's like we're classical stuff. We like to talk about old things. So the book that we'll eventually get to is Pastoral, Theology, and the Classical Tradition by Andrew Purves, Purves. So thanks, Andrew. I made reference to having taken classes with the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation, CCEF. This is one of the books from one of those courses. So we'll be tracking this idea that Graham is pointing to and that I think is really helpful and interesting. I guess before we get in,
super controversial, right?
What about it? Yeah,
I think if you were that guy at the psychologist conference and this was your talk, you would get in trouble,
get booed off the stage. Well, then let's start there with kind of the more modern context of where we are now. So you're saying that back in the day, theology might be some way to understand the counseling situation. What's our current mode? What's our current situation?
I mean, whenever I don't often float this idea in my class, but I often see my students revert to like a material answer to these kinds of things. And they always say, brain chemistry. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong in your brain with your chemicals. And that's why X, Y, and Z things are happening. Or if you're feeling sad, it's because of your brain chemicals. And when I'm like, well, tell me what does that mean? They're like, no, it's just your brain chemicals. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay. And I feel like, there's that wing of talking about psychology, is that you've got this, it's all chemical kind of wing, and therefore either drugs or some kind of balancing of the chemicals is what's needed.
Right.
And then there's probably something that would be on the other side of the spectrum, which is pseudo-spiritual, where it's now you sort of need to talk it out, you need to find the power within, and you need to sort of like psych yourself up, and power of self-determination, and
it's all spiritual.
And give yourself hugs and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Is that? I mean, again, this is a field that I'm not interested. I mean, not. No. It's just like
wow.
No. I mean,
so for your episode, Thomas.
Sorry, that's not what I mean. It's a field that I don't naturally have a. That I don't do a lot of reading on this in my spare time. So I'm speaking out of a more ignorance.
It's still helpful to know your association with it.
Yeah.
And I would also add your experience with students gives you access to a different generation, how they're thinking about mental health, maybe as a broader topic. AJ, what associations do you have, I guess, on this topic of counseling, maybe most broadly?
I know a lot of people who are close to me that have been through counseling. Mm-hmm. I personally know a counselor who's a great friend and goes to counseling herself, says everybody should, and it's fantastic. And on that spectrum that Graham talks about, from it's all chemical and physical to it's spiritual, I think deep down in my heart, I want it to be that the chemicals, the problem is there's a causation fallacy, right? Yes, the chemicals are different in your brain, but where's that coming from? Is it coming, like when you are sad, are you producing more of the sad chemical in your brain, or does more chemicals happen first and it causes your sadness? So it is happening, but I want deep in my heart for it to be the latter, that what I feel has an effect on me physically, and that if I can fix my theology, it'll be fixed. But I know that that's not, personally, I have experienced where it is chemical. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys know this about me. I have seasonal affective disorder, really bad. So when I'm in Washington,
well, so does everybody from the north. I mean, this is like that's par for the course in Canada.
And that's the thing. Like, there is a chemical element, because when it's overcast for 9 months and it gets dark at 4 p.m., I'm depressed and I spiral into depression when the circumstances of my life have not changed. And I realized this only in college, when one day I was like, my life is the worst. It's terrible. I want to die. Everything is doom and it's awful and I hate everybody. And then the next day it was sunny and I was like, I want to ride my skateboard. Like, it's just everything had changed. The only thing that was different was the sun.
Sure.
And so I know that there's a chemical element, and this is, like you say, it's a North thing, and it's provable, right? When it's dark for 2 weeks in Alaska, the suicide rates skyrocket. Suicide rates are higher in northern states, in states that are cloudy all the time. Sun makes a difference. Sure. And so I think it's got to be somewhere in between.
Yeah, but isn't that it? Because you can interpret that finding both ways, right? Both to say the environment is totally in control, or we got to figure out a way to deal with the fact that it's going to be dark for 2 weeks every year. Like, an empirical finding does not dictate one interpretation or the other. I guess is one way to say it.
But the personal finding was that, like, nothing in my worldview or outlook or attitude had changed.
Sure.
It was simply a feeling of doom that came with the clouds.
The change of the weather. Sure.
Yeah.
This is helpful. This is good. I guess as with all things, I should preface that nothing here is medical advice, and listen to your doctor. Or again, we're talking about ideas here, so don't. Again, please do listen to your doctor, whatever. Okay. And we're not going to end in a place where we're like totally opposed to counseling, therapy, psychiatry, any of those things.
I mean, clearly not. Like, you go, this is part of your profession.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Though maybe at some point as we go through this, I wonder how helpful the idea of counseling is to the work of pastoring, was the word you used last time.
Yeah.
And again, the title itself is Pastoral Theology in the classical tradition, not counseling in the classical tradition. And I think that, I don't know if we'll come back to that word, but so there are probably some problems that are embedded there. Okay, so that gives us kind of a starting place for this. Neither of you all made this. I guess, Graham, in your recap, you said this was also at the end of last time's episode. Your questioning was along the lines of whether therapy is essentially a new religion. It's a new set of theological beliefs to help in the conquering of certain issues.
I mean, that's one way you could characterize it. I think the way that I personally characterize it is it's not a new religion, but this is a thing that human beings do, and we are going to continue to do it even when we've divorced ourselves from God.
Maybe I should just call it, it's religious work, no matter what.
I think that's a better way to say it. It is religious work.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's sort of secular religious work.
Yes. And I looked a little into this and didn't really find anything. If I were to ask you what the Greek or Roman tradition of like pastoral, again, pastoral is not a good word, but like the Greek or Roman tradition of counseling, like is there any point of reference you would give for that? Like man up, like wouldn't it?
Well, no, I mean, you would do, then you get into, there's astrology that gets in there, so the planets have effects on you. Sure. Augury, like cutting up birds and see what they say to you.
Sure. And probably
divining from trees. I feel like there's also like a psychological smoothing effect that those things also have, or that those things are they have a place in sort of the. Yeah, people want, if anxiety comes from not wanting to know the future, well, then you've got this place of that kind of thing. But I don't know.
There's also a lot of, it depends on what ancient world you're talking about. Like there's a lot of physical activity for most of Greek history. Like you'd had the gymnasium. Part of your day was to go and stretch and run and play sports and do it publicly. And so it helped with feelings of isolation, and it helped with, a lot of depression that comes from, lack of physical activity and endorphins.
Sure.
And that was a physic that I've seen talked about several times, right? If you're feeling sad and you have lots of pains, and like sitting around isn't going to help you, you have to go and work out.
Sure. I guess that's the, like if you have an excess or deficiency of any of the humors, it's like you're actually supposed to go do something about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So at some level, AJ, I find it interesting and helpful that the first thing you point to of like, what did an old form of counseling look like? It was the body. It wasn't just a talk through things. It wasn't only a talk therapy.
There's also, I'm thinking of the scripture where it's like, and also take a little wine for your stomach. It makes the heart merry, right?
Sure,
if you're feeling bad, have a little wine.
Yeah. I like that. And we haven't brought it up, but probably even the sacrificial system for Greece and Rome, and probably also for in the Jewish tradition. There's some sort of psychological aspect to that too, of the release of certain things that you're holding on to, the feeling that it's been paid for and that you can move on past. We try and accomplish counseling in a different way, but it's a similar goal to. Graham, you said at some point you're going to talk about scapegoats and stuff like that. But
yeah, and it's also the other thing is like, it's not just true of a human person, but it's true of a society that sort of bad things can kind of build up.
Yep.
And then at some point, that buildup of bad things, either in an individual life or a social life, needs to be discharged in some way. And this is also plays into the idea of, actually, I sort of tongue-in-cheek was talking about bloodletting, but this is also the belief that they had in the ancient world. It's like you've got this sort of negative thing, like you got these, for lack of a better term, toxins that have built up in the blood. And so if we let the blood, it'll get all the bad stuff out, and then you'll make more better blood.
So you're talking about starting a purge.
I don't
seen that movie, The Purge?
No,
you want to start like social tensions build up. You got to let
Renee
those
already
release
talks about
every
this.
once in a while.
We'll talk about this later.
Yeah. Let me move it on from here. So just in the idea of psychology and counseling being religious work, you can pick your point of reference for this. I think Freud is an easy thing to point to. The idea that man is made up of id, ego, superego, that they're made up of id is instinct, ego is this like how things actually are, and superego is how you should act. It's like morality. So like that's a religious view of a person. It's a spiritual view of what is inside the person.
Gosh, that sounds a lot like the tripartite soul.
Sure does.
Yeah.
It's not religious, Thomas. It's psychology.
Yeah, let me trace this and see if we can, because that's you making that tongue-in-cheek joke actually is perfect.
Psychology is religious work without God.
Yes, yeah, there it is. This is Irvin Yalom. I referenced him last time. He's I pulled up his page just so I'd actually describe him correctly. An American existential psychiatrist, a professor of psychiatry at Stanford as well. He's I believe he's still in active practice. He's 89 years old, but he's been at it for a long time. This is from the prologue to his book, Love's Executioner, which I did reference last episode, but want to actually do justice to. I have found that 4 givens are particularly relevant to psychotherapy: the inevitability of death for each of us and for those we love, the freedom to make our lives as we will, our ultimate aloneness, and finally, the absence of any obvious meaning or sense to life. So again, the 4 givens that are the job of the therapist to teach to the counselee, to the patient. I found that 4 givens are particularly relevant to psychotherapy: the inevitability of death for each of us and for those we love. That's the first one. 2, the freedom to make our lives as we will. 3, our ultimate aloneness. And 4, finally, the absence of any obvious meaning or sense to life.
Bummer.
The
last one is a bummer. And I disagree with.
Do you want to say any more than that?
Just that, how do you practically sort of work through that if that really is your base case, and it's like, hey, kid, let me let you in on a little secret. Nothing means anything, but you got to go make healthy choices. It's like, how can you square that circle?
Weirdly enough, I find that pieces of that are really liberating.
Yeah.
Oh, the memento mori is very liberating.
Sure. Inevitability of death. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. You're going to die, and nothing matters,
Yep.
and so you can make your life how you want. Now, this doesn't necessarily lead to healthful choices. It can lead to all sorts of... It leads to direct fulfillment of your own desires and direction, right? And if those directions happen to be towards your own healthfulness, then great. But it doesn't matter in the end anyway, so who cares?
But this is Raskolnikov.
Yeah. But I think this guy, he's even smarter than all that. I'll read. This is just from the first paragraph. So he gives those 4, and then he himself says, "However grim these givens may seem, they contain the seeds of wisdom and redemption. And I hope to demonstrate in these 10 tales of psychotherapy how that's possible." This is the opening to the first chapter, also called Love's Executioner. "I do not like to work with patients who are in love. Perhaps it is because of envy. I too crave enchantment. Perhaps it is because love and psychotherapy are fundamentally incompatible. The good therapist fights darkness and seeks illumination, while romantic love is sustained by mystery and crumbles upon inspection. I hate to be love's executioner." So even he's trying to redirect desire ultimately. Like, again, in a weird way, there's like a lot of wisdom in this. I disagree with his phrasing of it, but like, yeah, this first story is about someone who thinks she loves someone who I think she's never met, is the story. and she's just obsessed with this guy, and ultimately that love needs to die. It's not
Correct.
real. Is that so? There's something like helpful and healthy in killing love in that case, right?
But why?
Why is it helpful?
Why is it meaningful to do that?
Because she's miserable.
Yeah, but this is my point. It's like, how is that not a foundational, meaningful statement? If he says ultimately there's no meaning.
Your point is that he is still resting on the assumptions of what C.S. Lewis calls the Tao, right? Yep. There is still the notion that obsession and like being unhappy because you are obsessed with something and the rest of your life is suffering. There is still a reason to get rid of that because it is better to not live in obsession with a ridiculous notion of love.
I just think it's incredibly lazy to say something like, ultimately everything is meaningless.
Yeah, and you should live your life differently.
And you should live your life. So it's like, no. Like you can't say that and then have me have a framework of agreement.
Well, usually the framework is like, that person would probably prefer to not be in love with someone she doesn't know and see her relationships suffer. So it's simply what she prefers to happen. If she prefers to be obsessed and really enjoys that and she's finding total fulfillment in it, then why not?
But then she also wouldn't go to a psychotherapist.
Right.
Like she sees there's a problem. So again, the second point is, we'll move on from this in a second.
How can a psychotherapist say there's a better way of existing if that's his fourth point?
He's not. This is a great. So the point, I'll just read, the freedom to make our lives as we will. It's the job of the patient to say, I want my life to be different, and to realize I have the tools to make it different. Again, I'm just describing this worldview. I'm not
sure.
Trying to agree with it.
This isn't the book. This isn't the Christian book that you had to read for your counseling job.
It is not a Christian book. I did have to read it as a part of the class. This is I'm referencing, I guess, 2 books from the program. And just in case anyone's curious, the point of reading this book wasn't just to tear the whole thing down. The point was to see that like there are ways that we talk about our faith that actually aren't helpful, and there are ways that he talks about despair that are helpful. Like it's an uncomfortable book to read from that perspective. All 10 stories in this book are success stories.
What were the 4 things again? You're going to die and everyone else is going to die.
Inevitability of death.
You have the power to be able to change these sorts of things.
Freedom to make our lives as we will.
Ultimate aloneness.
The ultimate aloneness.
The absence of any obvious meaning or sense to life.
Yeah. So then I would assume that a read that to a medieval person, and those last 2 points would be bones to pick with.
Yes, absolutely. Let's even take it further than that. What, Graham, you've already kind of given this answer. Sorry. What is the problem that he's addressing with these 4 truths? What is the presenting problem that someone would have coming to the counselor?
The presenting problem is that they would be placing their heart's affection into something that is ultimately not going to satisfy them.
What would they say the problem is? You're getting to like what's the actual problem.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're being deep and profound. But like
they would say the problem is like, I love this guy and this guy doesn't love me back or whatever.
Yeah. If I took it to even a higher level, it's to say I'm not happy.
I'm not happy.
This is the...
I'm an unhappy person.
Yes.
And I've come to you just to try to like figure it out.
And I want to feel better.
Yep.
So again, problem, I'm not happy. Solution, I need to feel better.
And when we do this, someone told me I should go to counseling.
Yes, exactly.
And they said it really helped them, so help me.
Yes. And again, my experience in like actually doing this work is limited, but from talking with others who have done this is what people come in saying. This is the first session repeated over and over again. I'm not happy. I want to feel better. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you all have talked with students where this is the thing where they think, I'm not happy, therefore something must be wrong, therefore I need to go to counseling. And then it goes into this, right?
Yeah.
Graham, you're pushing this in the right direction. I don't think so. I think the methods of counseling we have now match the problem and solution that we're looking for, but historically wouldn't make sense as presenting problems and wouldn't make sense as like the thing a person would come to someone looking for advice. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to dive into that, I guess, is the way to take this. Let's just maybe in thinking about like the problems of anxiety, let's compare that to an exchange that I love from a book called The Hammer of God. Has anyone read this book?
Nope.
Heck of a title though, isn't it?
Yep.
Sounds
like a René Girard book with that kind of title.
No, it's
didn't I do that on my last episode? Wasn't that like
God.
what both of mine were about?
The Hammer of God fell
Thor.
from heaven. No, what's the name of that book?
Thor.
Oh, you talk. Oh, yeah. Sorry, this is actually
about Thor, like the actual Hammer of God, Mjolnir,
the sequel to the Poetic Eddas.
Yep.
The Hammer of God is a novel. It's a story of 3 generations of pastors in what is the country? It's like Norway or Sweden, or I'm going to embarrass myself. Someone's got Sweden. So compare those 4 truths. They're depressing. I won't say them again. To this exchange. This is a pastor talking to his congregants. They start asking, so, there's a church service, and then afterward, there's like we would call it the new member meeting. This is like 300 years ago, so I don't know what they would call it. Ye old neweth member meetingeth. The people start asking questions. The questions began to come more and more freely. A daughter from a neighboring farm family dared to ask about what was troubling her. How shall one know for sure that one is called by the Spirit of God? Savonius thought for a moment. After leafing through the register of names to identify the questioner, he answered, Christina Jonsdottir, your name is listed among the baptized. You are called by God himself. You need never doubt that. But if one does not feel anything, then God feels so much more deeply. Should I read it again? Was that... I'm trying to compare these two of... one approach to counseling is to show the bleak nature of the universe. Nothing means anything. Death is coming for all of us, as opposed to incorporating a more positive view.
Yes. So, this has always been, and it's not just like that. Those are the only two options. Like even what we were talking about earlier, it has always bothered me when that psychologists clearly have different worldviews. And someone is more of a materialist, and it's 100% a brain chemistry thing, so we just got to get you on the right drugs. And another one is you just got to embrace the darkness, kid. No one loves you.
Right.
And then you've got someone who says what this pastor is saying, which is
your name is in the book of life.
Your name is in the book of life. There is a created hierarchy, and there's a place for you to fit into it. And what you have to do is submit yourself to that created hierarchy.
Sorry, can I be even more specific? He's saying that you are baptized. That's the list he's going through.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just an internal. How do you feel? Mm-hmm. Let's find ways to make you feel better. It's an external thing that's already happened to point to. And again, this is just this guy's view on baptism, but just to say he's applying a theological truth in a moment of anxiety to address.
But let's go back to that person who you were talking about at the beginning of that book that said, "I love this guy, and I find all of my identity in that person."
Yep.
And the psychologist should say, doing that's not going to make you happy. And if that person can get to that point where they're like, you're right, doing this is not going to make me happy.
Yep.
What is going to make me happy? Now you've got this is the tipping point question, because now the person in that first book will say, getting to the place where you can embrace the fact that there's no meaning and you have the freedom to create your own meaning. That would be the Nietzschean existentialist answer.
Right.
And then the pastoral answer is you are baptized.
Right. It's almost the pastoral answer is you're asking the wrong question in the first place.
Yeah.
The problem you're seeking to address is the wrong problem in the first place. And so we have to just remove that. The
problem they're saying is
let me just in my way of interpreting this, her question, or the presenting question, what she says is, how shall one know for sure that one is called by the Spirit of God? Mm-hmm. So the question
how do I know that I'm good? How do I know that I'm safe or saved or
it's an anxiety question.
Yeah, it's a question of anxiety.
I fear for whether my salvation is secure or not. One way to address this,
or is also
or for my friend,
in the quiet times when I'm away from everybody and I'm sitting in bed looking at the darkness, I wonder if this is even a thing.
Sure. And there are lots of ways to answer that question. Among them would be to try and make her feel better. Right now that you believe, you have a certainty right now. The psychoanalyst response would be, none of this is true anyway. There's, death is coming for you anyway. So, throw off the chains of this anxiety and just leave the whole project. There are lots of avenues for what to do with that question. The answer comes back as a piece of theology, I guess, is the only thing I'm trying to point to with these. I guess let me push even further to these are more. Both of these are newer, more modern examples. I want to point to this as a historical tradition of how counseling has been done. And whenever I go through an episode, I just think of things I should have said at the beginning. I think there's an important difference between counseling and therapy, just using those words, in that counseling is giving counsel. Is that an obvious thing that you all maybe thought all along the way?
No.
Okay.
So then what would therapy be?
To make one feel better about a situation. I'm overstating it and making it sound more negative than I mean for it to. But
so counseling could also have a take it or leave it aspect, and therapy has I'm
rehab.
Going to keep throwing. I'm going to try all
these
these different tactics to actually see what works.
Yes. Yeah. And yes, I think those are fair. I just want to make sure I'm using my terms clearly as I continue to go through this. So, to which I would say the ancient tradition is counsel. Counsel is being given in the face of despair, fear, anxiety, whatever. But it is they are truths that are being presented. It is not about you feeling better about certain things. Is that okay? That's the way I would put that. Okay, so now to this is helpful as setup for all this for the rest of what we'll do right now. So our book for the day, again, Pastoral, Theology, and the Classical Tradition, will also address some of the same ideas we've been talking about. They raise this question of the different goals of counseling in the modern context versus the older one. A relatively comfortable synthesis results in which pastoral theology and consequently pastoral practice in the church have become concerned largely with questions of meaning rather than truth, acceptable functioning rather than discipleship, and a concern for self-actualization and self-realization rather than salvation. And this is, again, where that term therapy is probably helpful to just have as a contrast to counsel. If you all have ever heard the modern church context called therapeutic, I think that's the idea that people are getting at. The goal is to make people feel better. Is this fair? Any pushback, disagreement so far?
That is, I think that's
so counsel's goal is not to make people feel better?
It's to get them through something, which might not necessarily be the same as feeling better. The goal is not the feeling. Is maybe one way to put that. To say I don't feel happy is not
a failure.
The counselor might be like, fine.
Yeah, that's okay. That can be okay. Can be.
Okay.
You gonna push back? Disagree with me?
No, I mean I'm just trying to understand the difference, and I'm wondering where that line is drawn, because it seems like different hierarchies of wisdom here. If I'm putting someone through therapy to make them feel better, when in all truth they should feel terrible, isn't that just worse wisdom than giving them counsel? Like, right? Therapy makes no sense if my goal is to make you feel better and really you should feel terrible.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
like, that is silliness.
Yeah.
Right?
I forget what, if you take, when you get a fever, you can take, is it Advil? And that like lowers the fever? Is that what you
Aspirin.
Aspirin. You take aspirin and it lowers the fever. But if you do that, the fever lasts longer. The purpose of the fever is to get something out of your body.
Correct.
And so if you reduce the fever, you lengthen the time that you have the disease.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying.
So it's like symptoms and causes.
Yes.
So like I'll give you an example. So my melon plants have a bunch of aphids on the bottom of them. And I can spend all this time like scraping off the aphids. And they're just going to come back. Or I can spend more. Yeah, it's therapy. Or I can spend more time like having a healthy soil, so that I will, because plants have a natural way of making sure that they don't get overrun by aphids. But when a plant is unhealthy, disease is going to set in.
Yes.
So there's this kind of sense that, and then there's not really like there maybe are different schools of thought on how to make soil healthy, but ultimately there's really only one kind of healthy soil. There's different ways to get healthy soil. There's only one kind of healthy soil. Yeah. And so if the ancient idea of the body is that there's only one kind of healthy body and all sorts of different diseases, I think they would also say there's only one kind of healthy soul, one kind of healthy soul, and a bunch of different ways for your soul to be sick. Yeah.
Yes, I like that, which would then point to then the purpose of counsel to get those, there are true thoughts that one should believe, and then that can orient and make sure, well, then what is my life supposed to look like? To come in and say, I want to be happy, is to say the goal of life is to be happy. Is that like it's embedded into the question in the first place? And that has to be, you have to ask that before you can.
Happiness will come later.
Yeah, sure.
Like happiness is a byproduct of getting the soul right.
Yeah. So let's start going through a couple of these people and see how many we can get to today. The book covers 5. I think we'll probably get to 2 or 3 of them. The first character, they're not characters, they're like real human people, is Gregory of Nazianzus. I hate pronouncing things on a podcast with lots of people listening. Hi there.
I can hear the email.
The science-ness.
Yeah. I was like, not even close. My favorite thing about this is y'all ever use with the Kindle app, you can have it read to you with the accessibility options. Have you ever done this before?
My Kindle don't even have speakers.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. If you have the Kindle app on your phone, you can use the iPhone's text to speech thing and it will read to you.
Got it. Okay.
Anyway,
I'd read real books.
I'd read Kindle books. Anyway.
Let's read Kindle books.
But the way they pronounce this is Nazi Ansis, like because it's the word Nazi. It's very funny every time it happens. So anyway, that was probably a bad non sequitur for him.
Well, our podcast just got flagged.
It's okay. We already have one explicit episode. Do you know this? It's AJ's on Wife of Bath, back with Canterbury Tales. That one got marked as explicit. It's just very funny.
We have an explicit. I mean, it's just not like we talk about a lot. We talk a lot about sexy things.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Are we rebels now?
I don't even know. I mean, we still have a job.
Yeah, probably. Is Gregory of Nazianzus someone that you all have any familiarity with?
Probably only because I confuse him with Nyssa. The Gregory of Nyssa.
Is he?
He was the Pope.
So then, not him. If that's
was he Gregory the Great?
Gregory the Great will come later. Actually,
oh man, you know what?
If we get to him.
I know. I'm gonna. Yeah, clearly I've displayed my ignorance.
I don't think he's Gregory the Great. I think it's different. There are multiple. Why are there so many Gregorys, guys?
Praise the sun.
What?
Nothing.
Praise the. We're doing Dark Souls, right? Is there a Gregory in Dark Souls?
I thought Gregory Nazianzus was a character in Dark Souls.
Okay, they all kind of sound like that, right?
They do.
Okay, so. There are many things about his life we could go into. This isn't about his biography, so sorry. But he lived in the 4th century. He would eventually become Archbishop of Constantinople, so he was a big deal dude. He did not want to be in church office. He describes this like tension between the mountain. What was it? The mountain and the throne, I think is what it was. Of he wanted to be a monk and live on his own, but he kept being called back to come and do church stuff, which probably like bodes well for him, right? He like didn't desire power or anything like that. He some of his ideas will eventually be incorporated by Gregory the Great. That's why he's kind of started with in this book as the first person. Each chapter of the book is to go through their pastoral theology. So again, I keep reading this. It's depressing. I apologize. Compare these two lists. The 4 givens of Irvin Yalom from the beginning. Inevitability of death, freedom to make our lives as we will, ultimate aloneness, absence of any obvious meaning to our lives, compared to the themes in Gregory's work. Theologians and pastors have a special calling that they should take seriously in seeking to be ordained. In the context of working with people, one of the most important contexts is theosis or divinization, becoming like God. The doctrine of the Trinity shows us how we are supposed to relate to one another. Christ is both fully human and divine, and he has statements on human nature that we won't actually go into today. Sorry. What differences do you see between those two lists? Special calling of the pastor, theosis.
So
Trinity.
Like the first, I mean, there's a conflict in cosmos. Mm-hmm. So there's a cosmological conflict. So the first one is sort of your sort of modern existentialist.
Yeah.
How do we make the most out of a bad situation kind of thing?
Right.
How do we live in a meaningless universe?
Right.
And the second one is, okay, because we all believe that the cosmos is like this, here's what a pastor needs to be.
Yes. Exactly.
And then it's all then the emphasis is on the the pastor, and then there's we are all doing the same work of the soul.
Yes.
And the pastor's job is to help people who are not doing as well as that as you are.
Yes.
I think back to Canterbury Tales, where the priest, the little simple parish priest, has a little saying that he lives by, which is, if gold shall rust, what shall iron do? And the idea being like, if I'm not living a good moral life seeking out the Lord, right, how can I ask my congregants to be good, moral, upstanding people seeking the Lord?
Sure. I like that. So it's more like it's a positive view. It's not tearing down all the like meaning around you. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking this while you were responding. There's something unifying in it too.
Yes.
That instead of it being my atomized desires,
go build it for yourself, man.
Yes, we're all supposed to be like this. We are all growing together in this type of holiness. We are all in this Trinitarian. We're brought into this through Christ, this Trinitarian life. Like all these things are unifying. They're things that are simply true, not simply true for me.
Yeah, like there's one of the definitions of diabolical is that everything's been pulled apart, right, and pulled into pieces. Yep. So how can you believe like, a Nike ad that says we're all in this together, and then have a therapist who says, like, you need to accept the fact that you are eternally alone.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, this isn't going to be a happy thing for me.
It will not.
If we're going to have these sort of competing messages. Anyway, so yeah, there's a cosmological unity in Gregory's piece. But then the pushback is like, well, that's just because he believes in this like Christianity thing.
Yeah.
And so then being part of a dogmatic group is the only reason people are part of dogmatic groups is because they're psychologically calming. But it's the real people who can accept reality are the ones that realize that, there's just the big black emptiness.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I don't know the right way to, I'll start talking, which is all I ever do. And then you can correct my ramblings. N.T. Wright, I think, is somewhat famous for his popularizing of an idea called Christus Victor.
Mm-hmm.
These are like super Christian topics for today. But the idea is that the way of framing the gospel isn't around your individual salvation, but it's the statement that Christ has won victory. Christ is victor. And that Christ is king, that the kingdom has been established. This is Mark 1. We did this in leadership a few weeks ago, that the message that he starts with is the time is at hand, repent, the kingdom of God is revealed. These aren't statements of you should believe this thing. These are statements of objective truth.
Mm-hmm.
Christ is Lord of the earth. He is in charge of all things. So it's just a response back to say, obviously we're ultimately making competing claims, but this isn't just I do this because it feels good. It's an objective statement has been made about the nature of reality. That's what is being responded to.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's why theology matters in this case. You're not telling someone to feel better because feelings change. You're giving them the queen of the sciences, theology. You're giving them the best of thought that there is to offer, thoughts about the best of things, God, right? So it's a different tool that you're using. Is that a fair response?
So then when you have someone who grew up in the church and, it's a good little Protestant who's gone to church and Sunday school and small group their whole life, and then they come into a Christian counseling office and they say, I feel bad, I want to feel better.
Yeah.
Is that the answer?
Repent for the kingdom of God is at hand?
Yes.
I mean, it's always the answer, but it should not be phrased that way. Because even your question presupposes that like you've bought into Christian counseling as a method. Do you know what I mean? Like there's there's a lot baked into that. AJ, you're about to jump onto something.
You could see it coming, huh?
I heard you breathe, so I knew.
So I mean, maybe I'm talking about really elementary stuff here, but all of this has just reminded me of a conversation I had with my ninth graders. I think it was my ninth graders about what the nature of wisdom is. Mm-hmm. I had a quote on the board that said like, if you are wise, you'll be happy. And all saints were happy people, right? And they're like, I don't know if that's true. I directly disagree with it. And I contended that if you are a wise person, or true wisdom should bring you happiness. Happiness should be one of the byproducts. And maybe not consistent all the time. If we're talking like low level, I just feel cheerful. Mm. But I mean like deep, lasting joy should be an outcropping of true wisdom. And then we got talking about, okay, well then what is wisdom? What is the wise person? And I think it's someone who has a correct and accurate view of the world around them. And so if I'm a Christian, I believe that correct view involves the Godhead, right? And that this world is created to be a certain thing. And that is why, like, a truly wise person, if they acknowledge the Godhead, even in times of sorrow, can rest on God's sovereignty, God's promise of future redemption. Like, there are things that will turn us back to happiness. Whereas if I do not believe in those things, I would contend that you do not have a correct view of the world, right? You are lacking in wisdom and that you do not recognize the Godhead. And then you remain in that sorrow because there is no truth for you to fall back on. So this person who enters into your thing and has been a good little Protestant Christian all their lives, I would begin to ask about their view of the world. Something in it, something in their view of themselves, in the world around them is lacking. And that might be that they deserve to have a good marriage because they've been promised it from every little movie they've ever seen since they were tiny, that love will conquer all. Mm-hmm. And so I have to absolve them of that and say, listen, sometimes love is really hard, and that is the true view of the world. But God is redemptive and has plans for marriage, and I can point them back to truths. And that's what, like, I can't help but think about your difference between counseling and therapy, right? Therapy is that same kind of process, but with the assumption that the ultimate goal of man is happiness, to feel better,
yes,
right? Whereas counseling would say, well, if you are continuously like still living through, say, a genocide, feeling better isn't really appropriate at this
Correct.
point,
Yes.
right? So you should feel terrible.
Bad. Yes.
But if I'm being true about our station, I would say, yes, perhaps you're living through something terrible, but you can also rest on, as terrible as it seems, God's sovereignty through all of this, and rest knowing that, right, center it on Christ and future redemption and the conquering of death altogether, and then appropriately locate death in the human life. Yes, death is going to happen, but as Socrates points out, we have no knowledge of what death is like, and so we don't know if it's a good change or a bad change. And so they might be lamenting death, but in all honesty, maybe it's a good thing, right? So
yeah.
There are ways to reorient their. I can't help but think that all of this is a process to solve ignorance. Ignorance is the problem, and ignorance not as it applies to like social matters, but if wisdom is the thing that will bring you true happiness because you have a right view of the world, then the whole process of counseling, therapy, theology, all of it is to solve ignorance. And so what I would do if someone walked into my office is find out where that ignorance lies. Do they expect that everyone is going to be good all the time? Are they having trouble with their parents and they have a wrong view about how their parents feel toward them, or a wrong view about how God feels towards them, or how much their feelings matter, right? There's got to be somewhere where everything's out of whack.
Is ignorance only a matter of knowledge? Is there such a thing as emotional ignorance or any other type of?
I would say that maybe emotional ignorance is part of like they are having a certain emotion that isn't in tune with what the world is really doing. And so they are misunderstanding something about their surroundings.
So your guy in your first book, I think he's right in saying an important step that people need to make is they need to accept the way that things are.
Yes.
If you lie to yourself, you're going to cause a lot of problems. So you need to accept the way that things are, but what he thinks the way things are is wrong.
And so I would say he is an unwise counselor because he is trying to align people's broken ignorance with more ignorance, and that is what is causing problems. If I have someone sad come in and I tell them, guess what, you're going to die someday and you're alone, I'm not sure that's going to help.
Mm-hmm. So he's giving them...
Which, to be fair, he does help them. Like, that's the point of the book is to prove that there are good outcomes. You would push back and say, yeah, but they're eternal beings. You know what I mean? Like,
to what end?
But he's giving people coping tactics.
Yeah.
As opposed to like what Gregory of Nazianzus or whatever. He's not giving them coping tactics. He's giving them. He's like inviting them into the story of what's happening.
Yes.
Whereas this guy is saying like the story. I don't know if that, that's just a Christian story. What actually is there is like bleak, black, dark nothness. So here is a tactic for you to be able to like make it through.
It reminds me of I had this car and it had run out of the battery had died, and I had a neighbor who's like, hey, you could pour wine in that battery and get another 2 weeks out of it. And I feel like that's a particular kind of counseling where I can cope with a busted battery by pouring wine into my engine at whatever cost and feel better for a little while, but it's not the true state of my battery, which is like dead.
Even Marcus Aurelius had to posit a divine presence that was fully good.
Yes.
In order for Stoicism to like function as a philosophy.
Yeah. Sure. And I didn't. This is not like a specific part of the research before this, but again, like let me take it in this direction. This is from the beginning. I think it ties together what you all are saying. My conviction is that the basic reconstitutive task for pastoral theology today is to establish once again the fundamental connection between the Christian doctrines of God, redemption and hope, and the pastoral ministry of the church. To my mind, reestablishing this connection is the single most important conclusion that can come from the study of classical texts and pastoral theology. Why does Gregory of Nazianzus insert a section on the doctrine of the Trinity in the middle of a treatise on pastoral care? Why does John Chrysostom go to great lengths to try to avoid ordination? Why is Gregory the Great so concerned with the spirituality of the pastor? And that's the thing that you all are pointing to. I like this idea of ignorance being the thing addressed. So there are truths that Dr. Yalom is pointing to that people need to learn. Your loves are wrong and misguided. But there are additional truths that he is not pointing to. And that's what Bogert's Hammer of God is trying to point to. There is actually an enchanted world around you. There's more going on around you than you even realize. And the pastor's job is to show someone that, right? To show them the things that can't be seen. That's good. just to wrap up on our Nazianzus guy, he has this idea of the physician of souls. The pastor's job is to be the physician of souls. Just the only thing to say there is that I think now we would point to a psychiatrist as like kind of the peak of the peak of being able to address problems of the soul. The psychiatrist has gone through medical school. They're able to give medicine. They're able to make prescriptions. So like, it's really, anyway, they get this authority through their ability to help the body. Correct?
Oh, I can't talk to you about this. I just have an MDiv, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's exactly right.
But you should go to somebody who's like trained in this. Yeah. Well, he's saying the MDiv should be, this is what the MDiv is, the Master of Divinity is.
Yeah. To read from here, in the context of the now rather famous idea of pastoral care as the art of arts, Gregory draws a parallel between the physician of souls and those who treat the elements of the body, giving readers a metaphor for pastoral work. According to Gregory, the pastor is a healer, even more so than the physician, for the pastor treats a sickness that is a deeply subtle foe of healing, a sickness of soul. His argument is that the counselor is the pastor. Again, it's the way he would talk about that, is doing more difficult work than the doctor who's dealing just with the body.
I feel like the English teacher has a pastoral role in that as well.
Yeah.
Wherein you are like in a book, if you were showing the truth of that book and then revealing to the student what it means to be a human person, and from there, so that the student can rightly consider what they are as a creature.
Yep.
That is something that's like the groundwork needed for happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I have two jobs, right?
Yeah.
Job one is the job you're talking about, and that's addressed with my quote of the day. And then job two is writing lab, where I teach them the mechanics of writing.
Yeah.
Right. So I teach them how, like, the truth of the world, and then how to correctly express that truth.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. We won't have time for fully delving into our second character of these five. John Chrysostom is this second fellow.
The silver tongue?
I think it's gold, but so you know that. So Chrysostom, that's not actually his last name. Do you
must
know
have leveled up.
I thought it was, anyway. He's got a good tongue, is what I'm trying to say. Do y'all know this wasn't actually his real name?
Really?
Golden mouthed is what that is. So his last name has been like lost to antiquity, and so Chrysostom is like a title. Like it's just he's Golden mouthed John. That's what John Chrysostom means. He early church father. He also was Archbishop of Constantinople after Gregory of Nazianzus.
Wait, Istanbul?
What? Yes. Isn't that
Byzantium?
Oh, this is that same joke from before. I still have, is this a song? I still don't know what this is a reference to.
Even old New York was once New Amsterdam.
Why they changed it? I can't say.
Hi, listeners. This has been fun. I'll just say this one. There's not enough time to dive into the rest of these, so I'll just say, AJ, this lines up perfectly with what you were saying. One of his core ideas, John hated allegorical readings of the Bible. He thought that it was opposed to like the clear meaning of what is in the Bible. Again, to say,
him and Origen, not buddies.
Yes, exactly. So he agreed with Antioch over Alexandria. That's a thing I wrote down. So if that's useful for you.
He has a really great sermon where he talks about parents who are really worried about their kids and getting into the right kinds of schools.
Uh-huh. Does he just make fun of them?
He just tears them apart.
Good, as he should. The only thing I'll say, this was the only point I wanted to say for him, and it lines up, AJ, exactly with what you're saying. His view was that only sound teaching can heal sickness of soul. Only sound teaching can heal sickness of soul. The reason that people have problems, the reason that there is this despair, name your vice, is that they have not received or have not accepted sound teaching. So I think you would be on board with this. I like this idea. I like calling it ignorance as the problem being dealt with through all this.
I mean, it sounds really like virtue signally. Like, you're just ignorant, but
no. But I think it
ignorance is like unwisdom.
Calling it ignorance is helpful because again, there's a way that just all of counseling, all of therapy has become medicalized or hospitalized, whatever the word is. Like they've become medical problems.
Clinical.
All of this has become much more clinical. Again, even seeing that psychiatrists, you go through medical school. You learn how to take care of the body. That's what then allows you to treat the psyche, the soul of the person. Ignorance is something all of us deal with. And again, whoever you referenced before, someone who says that everyone should go to counseling, that is correct. Everyone should have good counsel in their life. Whether that should come from the formalized structure of what we now call counselors, I think that's a secondary question. But there should be wise people who speak counsel, regardless of who you are, regardless of whether you pay them for their time. It is a broader function than just the doctor's office you go to.
But in my own life, I can say that there is a function to people who have that clinical training, especially when in regards to trauma. Like people that I have met that have had serious trauma in their lives, I feel unable to correct, to deal with some of the, I'm going to use ignorance. I don't mean it to be insulting, but some of the issues they're having, because I don't know the reality of what's going on in their mind and with their brain chemistry. And sometimes it is like they are entering a fight or flight response, and their body is having like certain hormones that do certain things, and having them understand the reality of the world, which is that their body is reacting in a certain way, is really helpful towards their healing.
Obviously,
that's something I can't help.
Sure. Obviously, there's a place for still that professionalized view toward counseling. What most people need is simply counsel. What most people need is
But AJ, what you're talking about is like, those are the cases where when something of an extreme nature that is not the average, everyday, ordinary thing. But when we say, well, what's good for that situation should be democratized and given to everybody. Right. And then you're going to have these, these weird incentive structures where you're going to catastrophize ordinary experience versus extraordinary experience. Right. Or you're going to pathologize regular human experience versus extraordinary human experience, which does contain a certain...
There's a physical element,
which does contain like something that acts in the person like a pathogen, right? You're right. When someone has experienced extreme trauma, witnessing horrific things, that extraordinary experience, they now have very real sort of physiological things that happen, like a fight or flight experience of thing. But to say, well, that's helpful for them, it could be helpful for someone dealing with too much math homework. Well, now or whatever. Right. Yeah. Who's feeling really bummed that they got dumped. That's a dangerous move, even though it feels like a caring move.
Well, let me take it even further. So I forget who first pointed me to this, but narcissistic personality disorder is included in the DSM. And, can you imagine going into the doctor being diagnosed with NPD? Mm-hmm. Like, it suddenly changes it from
you're just prideful.
You're a jerk.
Or I have a pride problem, to I have this disorder, it's the way I am. That language shift, I think, is really important in this.
But there even help, not to downplay the pathologizing side. Like, for me to understand that I have seasonal affective disorder means that when it's cloudy and I feel this impending feeling of doom, I can tell myself the truth, that nothing has changed, that my world is good, and that I simply have a weird feeling that I can safely ignore.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to disagree with you guys.
No, you're not disagreeing.
No, it's just...
I'm wondering if there's more to say than just that. Again,
my worry is that the gatekeepers of something like a DSM are not have the incentives to let more things in.
Yes, right.
Than should be let in to the category of pathological behavior.
Because the legal side of it then is that only licensed professional counselors can then deal with a thing.
Correct.
The DSM is not technically.
I know
the DSM is not law, but still to say, if you are speaking with someone who is prideful, they suddenly get narcissistic personality disorder. Now it's a licensed professional
counselor.
And
then this creeps up in our thesis program where kids are like, oh, I want to argue that shaky leg syndrome should be added to the DSM. It's like, well,
right.
How?
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to point to. I thought Graham's idea from last time was really helpful and interesting, that there's a way that an approach to giving counsel has
thank you, Thomas.
Been changed. I thought that was a really great 7 minutes of the podcast.
At least we could salvage something from it, right?
And then just to say that there is this, again, we're going back to the 300s. There's an ancient tradition of this, of the way of dealing with problems in life doesn't just have to be changing how you feel about them. There are objective truths outside of you that to point to and to learn about, to educate yourself.
But I thought old people were just superstitious.
That's exactly
and
right.
had nothing, no value for the modern man.
I didn't say this earlier, but isn't the whole point of the Enlightenment Project to get all the benefits of religion without religion?
Yes.
And that's part of what psychology is
guess what's going to happen?
It all falls apart. All things fall apart. And so just to say that these methods can still be helpful and work. There's still the Christian Counseling Education Foundation. Nouthetic counseling is another movement within this. But or even if you are a church-going person, your local pastor, they have something to say about whatever you're going through. They want to help you. And in many cases, they're a great first person to go to. And they'll tell you if you need to go to a counselor after that. But just to say that. So
cool.
I think that's all I wanted to say.
Rock and roll.
Cool.
Yeah.
Last words, Graham?
Oh, just that last thing that Thomas said is probably going to spark another podcast, which is, that the goal of the Enlightenment Project is to have all the benefits of religion without God. When that project fails, and we talked about this in the podcast on After Virtue, when that project inevitably fails, what is birthed out of that? And I think part of it is some kind of like more primitive folklore spirituality. Like, I think about this every time I see people say, oh, look, or did you know that like witches have been cropping up on TikTok? Have you heard this story?
No.
Oh, no, there's a whole witch movement.
So there's a whole witch movement happening right now where it's sort of going into, this rediscovering of the old ways of
it's largely paganism, I think.
And it's sort of paganism or sort of praying or little voodoo dolls or little spells and that kind of thing. But that will take hold in people when something like when the Enlightenment doesn't give what it promised, which is sort of spiritual meaning without God. People will be like, oh, well, I've now discovered this thing that actually is giving me more spiritual meaning, and it's going to be this more sort of
And I think that's along the lines. Rusty Reno just came out with a book, Return of the Strong Gods, but he points not to you're saying like actual like ancient pagan religions. He's pointing to like nationalism as what steps in as the answer.
And he goes into that nationalism, populism.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's all broken down into tribalism.
Yes, exactly.
So some people will find a tribe in a strong nation. Some people will find a tribe in like esoteric teachings of like wacky spirituality,
like the OTO or something.
I don't know what that is.
It's basically the Church of Satan.
Yeah, communities that form around other sort of special interest groups like. People who really like heavy metal music in Finland, like it's a thing,
right?
So these the world will sort of fracture into those sort of more tribal allegiances, which is
a bummer.
Maybe.
Oh, this will be another episode then.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think you're right, and ultimately it is going to be a bummer, but it is also like, will there be a soft landing or a hard landing in that kind of thing?
Don't know.
As I end here, I always think about takeaways for our non-Christian listeners. And if I think the takeaway I would take was if I'm heading towards counseling, and if you agree with my posit that the best like wisdom is to have your best grasp of reality, then you need to find a counselor that you believe has a direct grasp of what is actually happening and can counsel you for that specifically. And I think that's good advice for Christian listeners too. If you are going to take advice from someone, make sure that they have as little, and I'm using ignorance as in like lacking a correct view of the world, as little ignorance as possible, that they have their kind of finger on the pulse of exactly what's happening, and I can go to them for advice. And I think we all do that. Like we look for people that we think are smart. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. And I gave all that information we usually give at the end at the beginning. So I guess we just say...
You stopped listening anyway.
See you next time.
Why would you say that?
Because I do when I listen to podcasts. When they're wrapping up, I'm like, bap.
So no one's listening right now.
I can say anything.
We can say whatever we want to right now. What do you...
Peanut butter sandwich.